Overpaying for anything sucks, especially socks, so why pay $45 for a single pair of grip socks when you can spend less than half? Pure Grip Socks Pro feature our best materials for optimal fit, moisture wicking, and performance at a fair price, just $16.99 a pair at puregripsocks.com.
For a while now, football boot brands have been criticized for running out of ideas. Basically, the boots not getting any better despite all these new models coming out. And that's because more or less, they've pretty much tried everything. That is, everything except magic. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Umbro Velocita Elixir Pro, their latest offering in the speed category that replaces the Alchemist, still utilizing their Pro Weave material for the upper, but reworking it in such a way that looks very different, but also feels, in my opinion, significantly better. Football boots that unfortunately bear a fairly steep retail price of $275. And not that price has anything to do with objective performance, but when you price your boots as aggressively as Umbro have, especially in the speed boot category, it now becomes a question of, do you buy the Velocita Elixir Pro or a pair of Nike Mercurial Superflies? With that in mind, we're going to go over all the details of Umbro's latest football boots, including the good and the bad, as well as take a look at how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more and perhaps wondering whether or not these could possibly be worth their $275 retail price, please stick around and watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, availability on Umbro's products has not been great as of late, but if there is anything available, hopefully with some SR4U coupon codes, they will be available via the first link down below. And as always, if you guys enjoy these brutally honest reviews, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2023. Compared to the Velocita Alchemist it replaces, the Elixir model still kind of runs with the same basic concept, of course utilizing Pro Weave as an upper material once again, where it's being promoted as a single layer woven upper, where they've basically tried to engineer the right amount of stretch, pliability, and structure in all the right spots, where instead of having kind of like this webbed pattern that we had on the previous generation, now you kind of have these straight lines almost in the form of a chevron running on either side, and then of course you have that kind of split coloring look that does give the boot a very unique general aesthetic that personally I'm a big fan of. Nonetheless, the yarns and knitted upper itself does admittedly feel more pliable and significantly more sock-like than the previous model, which honestly I thought was just kind of on the stiffer side overall. I can't say that I still think that this is an unbelievably good upper, but I do think that it feels very similar to more popular speed boots out there, like the Puma Ultra Ultimate, which admittedly, not one of my favorite speed boots, but I do think that this does feel, in general, pretty good. I also think it's a little bit silly to call this a single layer synthetic upper, mainly based on the fact that it does have a lining material in addition to this single layer of woven Pro Weave. Nonetheless, it does feel soft against your foot. They have added a little bit of extra padding and thickness to this material compared to the Alchemist, which I think does make for a really nice touch on the ball. The general feel I thought was very premium, despite the upper in general, to the touch maybe feeling a little bit on the rigid side. And as far as what makes this unique compared to other football boots out there is the actual knit itself doesn't have any kind of a top layer of polyurethane. You're only going to find that as kind of like a guard around the toe box and forefoot where the upper connects to the sole plate itself. Instead, they've actually used some TPU plastic within the yarn itself to give it a little bit of a surface texture, where in general, there's not a ton in the way of extra grip, but there's just enough to where the boots definitely don't feel slippery on the ball, something that I really do appreciate. And also for those that care, the yarns used in this upper are technically 50% recycled, but that has nothing to do with performance. To make a long story short, despite how intricate the woven pattern within this upper might look, it ends up feeling very similar in that you can't really distinguish which areas have added structure and which areas have more stretch and pliability to them. In general, it just feels like a knitted upper that, for the most part, moves pretty nicely with your foot. They've also incorporated a one-piece design to the upper with a central lacing system that runs nice and deep, which I think does lend itself well to giving this boot a very secure feeling on your feet. I think in general, the overall responsiveness of this is in the upper end of what you can expect from a lot of speed boots out there, certainly ones with knitted uppers, so I'll definitely applaud them for that. The knitted material across the top of the foot is fully elasticated and generally feels very premium. This is definitely something that you would expect to find on a Nike product, for example, which I think is kind of the industry standard when it comes to knitted uppers. And then at the back, you're gonna find a low cut design, a little bit of an extension at the back, a little bit of an extension at the front, just to help with putting the boots on and taking them off. You do have an external heel counter as a part of the sole plate with a little bit of added structure inside as well, kind of above what is admittedly a fairly low heel counter. And then internally, you're going to find a mesh material lining the heel itself that actually matches the mesh that you're going to find on the insole, which is an interesting design that I can't say that I've ever seen before. The insole itself, however, is a super cheap black foam, especially considering that this is a $275 football boot. Not that this feels bad, but I would just expect something a little bit less generic for this amount of money. Nonetheless, the heel liner itself doesn't have a lot of padding, and the overall shaping of this heel is very straight up and down, which is not a bad thing, but for me personally, I think it's just the shape of my heel. I do feel some pressure in the lower areas of the heel itself, not to the point where blisters are a huge concern, but just in terms of overall comfort, it's not the best that I've experienced in the speed boot category. And again, for $275, you want everything to generally feel pretty good. Which brings us to the base of these boots, where if you're familiar with the Umbro brand, you'll recognize this sole plate tooling because they've been using it for 4, maybe even 5 years now, and I'm not quite sure why, other than just saving a little bit of money in the production cost of something different. The sole plate itself is their Sprint Plus layout, and it's made from a Pebax material, which sounds great. That's premium. You're going to find that from some of the more popular brands as well. However, the sole plate is really firm through the forefoot, and if you apply any kind of pressure, it just buckles right here at the base of the heel, which is typically an area where you want some structure. This is something that I generally only see on counterfeit football boots, and it's not detrimental to the feel or performance of this sole plate, but I just would expect something that maybe is engineered and just generally designed a little bit better than this, just because that's something you will not find from just about any other high-end football boot, period. That is still super questionable to me. Nonetheless, the sole plate itself, like I said, feels fine. Is it a standout in the speed boot category? Absolutely not. I would definitely say it's on the lower end of things, although it is quite lightweight, which you guys will see in just a second. And then the studs themselves, this being their FG layout, the studs are just on the short side, which I think is great if you play on harder ground. However, for those that are looking for more aggressive traction, especially from something that is labeled as a pair of speed boots, I think you might be a little bit disappointed. You kind of have like these bladed style studs in the heel, and then in the forefoot, you technically have a blade here and here, but they're extremely small. The other studs are rounded. You can see the mold itself, they're almost like angled inwards, where the plastic itself doesn't have enough structure to kind of keep everything straight. I just feel like it's one of those sole plates that, especially for $275, they just could have done a lot better. And the fact that this is just carrying over from at least 4 years ago, it's pretty inexcusable at this point that they're still running with this. And again, for the price that they're asking, I think everyone should just expect a lot more. When it comes to weight, the Elixir feels pretty light, and that's because it is. In a size 9.5 US, you'll see that the boots weigh in at 6.8 ounces, the equivalent of 193 grams, which in the realm of high-end speed boots, I guess the industry standard would be the Nike Mercurial, and these are basically within a gram or two of the Vapor 15 Elite. On feet, there are some things I love and don't love so much about the Elixirs. I think the general feel of the Pro Weave upper is that of one that is definitely on the more structured side of things. So from a lockdown perspective, it's really good. But if you're looking for that sock-like level of softness, you're not necessarily getting it from this boot. Although again, I think that aspect of this upper does feel like an improvement over the Alchemist model that came before it. From a pliability perspective, it does move nicely with your foot considering the structure of the upper. So in terms of having a balance of structure and flexibility, which is kind of what they're touting in the marketing material, I think they have achieved that, although they're definitely not the most comfortable speed boots that money can buy. Speaking of comfort, the heel is a little bit shallower than I would personally like it to be, and again, I'm not a huge fan of the minimal amount of padding that they've gone for in the lower part of the heel liner. That's something that will, of course, vary a lot from person to person, depending on preference as well as the shape of your feet. But for me, I just don't think that they're the most comfortable in terms of what you can get. And at $275, you can get just about anything. I love the deep central lacing system. I think that allows for tons of adjustability and a custom shaping where when you pull the laces tight, it really does feel like this upper is wrapping your foot quite nicely. The base shape, I think they've definitely done a really good job with. And then from a width perspective, they definitely have some decent width to them, to the point where I think they will work for most people. If you have super wide feet, there's not going to be a ton of stretch to this upper just because it is kind of more on the structured side. But as long as you don't have excessively wide feet, I think they will work for most people. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and they fit relatively snug. I would say that they run maybe about a quarter size small, where if you're wearing your boots right now and they already fit pretty snug, going up half a size wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea. Whereas if you're currently wearing your boots in a size that does have a little bit of extra room, going true to size will probably eliminate that. So it does really depend. It's kind of a little bit in between sizes for me personally, but overall, I think for the vast majority of people, going a half size up is going to be more true to what most other brands have on offer. So in conclusion, the Umbro Velocita Elixir Pro isn't great, but it's not awful either. I generally like what they've done with the upper. I think it's an improvement over the Alchemist model that it replaces, despite admittedly being quite similar. I think the overall shaping of the boot is quite nice, and I really appreciate the deep central lacing system. However, the sole plate end stud pattern I think is pretty inexcusable and well below standard for what should be expected at a $275 price tag. And in general, for that amount of money, there are just better football boots to be had, either in the speed category or outside of it.